Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. So, I recently read Elon Musk's biography, and there are a bunch of lessons from the chap that we can learn from about how he's built this ridiculous roster of companies. So in this video, we're launching a new series on the channel called Case Studies, where we distill and discuss wisdom from cool people all around the world. And in this episode, we're gonna go over 10 life lessons that Elon Musk uses, some for productivity, some for general life, and some kind of meta things that we can learn from, hopefully to help live our own best lives. So lesson number one is that being ridiculously successful doesn't automatically make your life better. And there's this thing that we all have a tendency to do, which is that we lionize people like Elon Musk and Steve Jobs. And we think that because these people have made it by traditional metrics in society, we should therefore kind of look to them as role models, as people to aspire to. And I think that's all well and good. But I think what's really interesting about Elon is that when he's asked in interviews about how he does his stuff, he often says that he wouldn't actually recommend his lifestyle to a lot of people. And here's what he says about people that want to try and be like him.
If somebody wants to be me or do the things I've done, I would say most probably you're mistaken. You do not want to do that. You'd have to have some kind of like rage demon in your skull that you just got to get it done.
So obviously our friend Elon is really successful, but it sounds like he wouldn't actually particularly recommend his lifestyle to a lot of people. And this ties in with a really cool concept called pixel theory, which I read about on the fantastic blog Wait But Why by Tim Urban. Now the idea here is that life is a picture, but we live in a pixel. And when we think of someone like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or whatever, we think of the whole picture of their lives that, oh, this is the richest person in the world and they've got all this power and influence and fame and prestige and they seem to do cool things. We think of it in broad, big picture terms. But what Tim Urban says in the blog post is that we live in an individual pixel, and these people live in an individual pixel of that entire picture. And so it's really less about the grand narrative of someone's life that contributes to whether they are happy and fulfilled and find meaning in their life and stuff. And it's a lot more about what they're doing day to day. And so this is why this is lesson number one, because even though we're doing the series where we're trying to distill wisdom from famously successful people around the world, we want to take all of their stuff with a bit of a pinch of salt and recognize that obviously the journey is more important than the destination. And if Elon is saying to people that he wouldn't recommend his lifestyle, we shouldn't be so quick to try and lionize it and think that this is the model for how we should live. So with that caveat in mind, which actually applies to absolutely everything you ever hear on the internet or in interviews and stuff, everyone is just speaking from their own life experience. And you know, we can choose the important bits that resonate with us and that we can apply to our own lives, but we shouldn't be so quick to try and adopt absolutely everything in the life philosophy. So with that caveat said, let's move on to lesson number two. And lesson number two is that having a shower is really the best thing ever. So when Elon was doing a Reddit AMA, someone asked, what daily habit do you believe has had the largest positive impact on your life? And Elon Musk official simply replied with showering. I couldn't find any more quotes about specifically the showering thing, but there's a bunch of articles that other people have written talking about how Elon freaking loves his daily shower and how it gets him into the right headspace, and how if he doesn't have his shower, he feels like, you know, he doesn't have his ideas, he feels like his creativity is not like unlocked, and all this kind of stuff around having a shower.
No, I do. I just kind of stand there in the shower.
So you have long showers?
I do actually.
Create
yeah.
less.
Long showers. Sounds wrong.
And this was interesting because for me, like this morning, I had like a 3-hour-long writing session because I'm working on my book. And in between the writing session, I had a shower, and I like to take my time in the shower. I spent about 15-20 minutes in the shower, just like enjoying it and mulling over some of the ideas. And part of me was thinking, this having a shower thing is not very productive, because I should be writing my book here. And then I was thinking, like, what the hell is wrong with me? Why am I thinking that having a shower is not being productive? Like, the point of life is not to be productive every single second of the day. Having a shower is something that I enjoy. I luxuriate in the water, the conditioner, brushing my teeth in the shower to be a bit more productive, that kind of thing. And I also realized that I was getting a bunch of ideas in the shower that I could then incorporate into the book. And speaking of showers, the water that we spend in the shower often ends up in the ocean, and the oceans are in a very bad state. And that's why this video is in support of hashtag Team Seas, which is an initiative by creators all around the world, led by Mr. Beast and Mark Rober, to try and clear out 30 million pounds of trash from our seas around the world. So for every dollar that the campaign raises, there's gonna be one less pound of plastic in the oceans. And if you wanna donate, head over to teamseas.org, or there might even be a donation button under this video if that works nicely. This video is actually sponsored by CuriosityStream, but they have very kindly allowed us to replace the plug for CuriosityStream with the plug for Team Seas, and I'll be donating all the proceeds from the CuriosityStream video to Team Seas as well. So if you want to help this initiative with all these creators all around the world of clearing up the oceans and making sure that your shower water goes into a clean ocean rather than a dirty ocean filled with trash, head over to teamseas.org or hit the donation button down below somewhere in the video description, and let's try and get this to $30 million. If you're interested, then half the money that we raise is going to go to the Ocean Conservancy, and they're going to focus their efforts on clearing up the beaches and the oceans, and the other half is going to an agency called the Ocean Cleanup, which is focusing on rivers, because apparently 80% of the plastic in the world's seas comes from 1% of rivers. And so if we can target the rivers and get get rid of the trash from there, we will actually make a big difference on the ocean scale as well. It's a pretty cool initiative. Our friend Elon is obviously a big fan of saving the planet as well, and it's kind of nice that all of us creators can band together and do something cool and raise money for genuinely a very good cause to hashtag save the planet, hashtag Team Seas, all that stuff. Anyway, let's move on to lesson number 3 from Elon, which is that reading is the best thing ever. Now, there was a cool interview with Elon where someone asked him how he founded SpaceX, a rocket company without a background in rocket science, and his response was something along the lines of, I read a book about it. And this is something that really comes through in his biography, where when they talk about his early life, a thing that really stood out to me was just how much he enjoys reading and was just like devouring books from the age of like 3 onwards. Here's a quote from the book. "The most striking part of Elon's character as a young boy was his compulsion to read. From a very young age, he seemed to have a book in his hands at all times. It was not unusual for him to read 10 hours a day," said Kimball. "If it was the weekend, he could go through 2 books in a day." And here's another quote where Elon himself is speaking. He says that, "At one point, I ran out of books to read at the school library and the neighborhood library. This is maybe the 3rd or 4th grade. I tried to convince the librarian to order books for me. So then I started to read the Encyclopedia Britannica. That was so helpful. You don't know what you don't know. You realize there are all these things out there." Now, obviously, we're big fans of reading here on the channel, and whenever I listen to interviews or read books from people who are famously successful, they always say that reading has absolutely changed their life. And they always say that they don't know a single other person who is successful who doesn't also say that reading has absolutely changed their life. So, I still get a bunch of messages and emails and stuff from people on Instagram and Twitter being like, "Oh, I only read like 1 book this year, 2 books this year. How do you find more time to read?" All that kind of stuff. To be honest, my biggest tip for this is get a Kindle and spend half an hour before bed each night reading, because it's a good way of falling asleep. And if you do that, you can get through quite a lot of books fairly quickly. So worth doing. Elon, big fan of reading. Lesson number 4 is to have a clear vision for the stuff that we're doing. Now, Elon is a really interesting example here because his vision for SpaceX is to make humanity a multi-planetary species, and his vision for Tesla was to help accelerate the transition to renewable energy. These are both pretty big vision type things, but often if you ask someone, or if you think yourself, if you're watching this, what is my vision for life? That's like genuinely a really hard question to answer, and it feels like, at least to me, when I used to think about it, I used to think, God, I have no idea. Like, how? Like, I'm personally not interested in like affecting mass change in the world and all that kind of stuff. There were a couple of exercises that I found helpful to help me figure out like a life vision, shall we say, and it still sounds a little bit cringy to say it. The first one is the gravestone technique, which is to ask yourself, what do I want written on my gravestone? And that's actually a fun question to actually think about. What would you actually want written on your gravestone? When I do that, I land on about 3 things. Some combination of good father, good husband, and inspirational teacher. And it was doing that exercise that made me realize, oh, maybe the thing that I really value above all else is, well, apart from the good husband, good dad stuff, is being a teacher. And that gave me a lot of clarity because it helped me realize that actually maybe practicing medicine as a doctor is not necessarily my calling, and teaching stuff, maybe on the internet, maybe in real life, is more of the thing that really resonates with me. And so when thinking what I want to do with my life, I've kind of kept that in the back of my mind. And the other exercise that's quite useful for this is the funeral technique, which is to ask yourself, what do you want people to say at your funeral? This is also kind of helpful in terms of figuring out a life vision, figuring out what sort of person we want to be. And the third one, while we're on this topic, is the Wikipedia technique, which is to ask yourself, what do you want written on your Wikipedia page? What would be cool when you have a Wikipedia page about the stuff that's written on it? And these things I find kind of helpful. I'm not going to share my own personal life vision in this because it's kind of a personal thing and I sound really cringe when I say it, but maybe in a future video we'll talk about that. But either way, Elon talks a lot about how having a clear vision is one of the things that drives him. I don't think any of us are going to have as like grandiose a vision for, I don't know, making humanity colonize Mars as Elon will, but even so, having some kind of vision and thinking about it just a little bit might potentially help us. All right, lesson 5 is the micro-scheduling method. And basically, in a bunch of articles and interviews that he's done, Elon talks about how he schedules his day, or rather his assistant probably schedules his day, into 5-minute blocks, so that there is something happening in every 5-minute chunk. He probably takes this a bit too far. He even like has lunch in a 5-minute slot and usually has lunch inside meetings, and most of us probably don't want to be that hardcore when it comes to scheduling our days. I personally think for me and my life, 5-minute chunks is not enough time, but I do really stand by the idea of scheduling our day and running our day based on our calendar and deciding in the morning what we want to do with that time in that day, so that we're not spending the rest of the day thinking, I wonder what I should be doing right now. I'm going to try the 5-minute thing at some point. There was actually a reporter called Hayden Field who tried this and wrote an article on entrepreneur.com about this. I'll link it in the video description if you want to check it out. It seemed kind of interesting, but I do like the idea of trying out the 5-minute schedule and see if it makes a difference. But the broad overall point is that scheduling stuff into our day and using our daily calendar as a way of helping us figure out what we want to do with our time and intentionally deciding that ahead of time rather than in the moment is often a way to be more effective if that's the thing that you care about. Now, lesson number 6 was going to be to get really good at email, because at various points, Elon has said in articles and in interviews that he loves asynchronous communication. He doesn't do phone calls, he doesn't do meetings. He really likes email because he can like reply to email while he's on his phone in a cab or something, and it doesn't rely on two people like actually getting together and talking. But in a recent interview that Elon did with Sriram Krishnan, who is a new friend of mine and one of the partners at Andreessen Horowitz, he actually did a complete 180 on this, and he said that he really doesn't like email.
Texts are way better to deal with, and then in-person meetings are much better. Even Zoom meetings or whatever, they're still better than email. Anything's better than email, frankly.
And again, I think there's a good meta point here, which is that people's productivity habits and lifestyles and stuff can and do change over time. This biography was written in like 2015, 2016, and we're 5 years in, so it's probably kind of out of date on the stuff that Elon Musk is currently doing. It's pretty good for his kind of past story. But I often think about this when people message me on Instagram or whatever, asking, hey, what app are you using for X, or what app should I use for Y? And when it comes to like apps like to-do list or note-taking and stuff, my personal app choices often vary. These days I'm using Apple Notes and I'm using Todoist, but like this time last year I was using Things and I was using Evernote, or I was using Notion, I was using Roam or whatever. People's habits change over time, and certainly the way that Elon approaches email has radically changed over time. And so if someone read one of his articles back in the day and was like, oh my god, email, and decided because Elon does it to switch their entire lives to running on email, then they'd probably feel a bit snaked when Elon suddenly does a 180 on this. He's not trying to be a role model for everyone else to follow and to follow his productivity habits. He probably just doesn't even care, and for him it was just a bit of a throwaway comment to mention at one point a few years ago that he likes email, and to mention at one point this year that he doesn't really like email. And so the meta point here is we don't want to be overly wedded to following the advice of someone word for word, and instead think about the principles, think about the reason as to why they made that choice, and then decide to build our own habits based around that, maybe using that thing as inspiration rather than as a kind of set of instructions step by step. All right, so lesson 7 relates to the idea of setting stretch goals, i.e. trying to do stuff in a way that is more ambitious than the traditional wisdom about this. Now, in the book, there's a nice quote from a former SpaceX executive who talks about how demanding Elon was when it came to setting goals, because they were trying to build a car that could go from LA to New York in one tank of fuel. The team will work on the car for a year and test all of its parts. Then, when they set off for New York after that year, all of the vice presidents think privately that the car will be lucky to get to Las Vegas. What ends up happening is that the car gets to New Mexico, twice as far as they ever expected, and Elon is still mad. So basically the vibe here, and the vibe in this whole book, is that Elon has these ridiculous goals that he sets for himself and for his team. People do say he can be very demanding, can be a bit of a dick when it comes to sort of forcing people to follow those, and has a very short fuse and will fire people if he thinks they're not being if they're not being fast enough. Maybe that's changed in the last 5-6 years since the book was written. I don't know. I don't know the guy personally, although Elon, if you're watching this, would love to interview you on the channel sometime. And when it came to something like Tesla, initially the Tesla Roadster was supposed to come out in 2006, which was a ridiculously ambitious deadline. It ended up coming out in 2008, so like 2 years late, but that was still faster than other competitors would have done it, than other people would have done it, because they would have taken a much longer time to actually get this thing off the ground. And so for me, the lesson here is that there is some value in setting stretch goals. And one thing I often try and encourage the team is that like we don't want to take too long with doing stuff, because then when it comes to planning, you can plan all you want, but ultimately execution, when the rubber meets the proverbial road, that's when real stuff tends to happen. And so, for example, when we were initially planning our first cohort of a part-time YouTuber Academy, my online course, if we'd done it more sensibly, it would have taken about 6 months to plan. In reality, it took about 2 weeks to plan, and then we just put the course out there to see what happens. And this is sort of a scrappy startup kind of vibe of making something and then iterating on it over time, rather than spending ages planning to try and get the perfect product out. And that certainly seems to be the way that Elon's approaching building stuff at Tesla and SpaceX and his other companies. So overall, I'm not personally a massive advocate of like lots and lots of goal setting and setting these sort of arbitrary deadlines and stuff, but clearly it seems to work for Elon Musk, and my ambition is a lot less than his, so maybe there's something there going on. All right, so final lesson from Elon is to focus on only the important things. Now here is a segment from one of his commencement speeches.
I'd say focus on signal over noise. A lot of companies get confused. They spend money on things that don't actually make the product better. For example, at Tesla, we've never spent any money on advertising. We put all of the money into R&D and manufacturing and design to try to make the car as good as possible.
Basically what he's saying is we want to focus on the signal over the noise. We want to focus on the important 20% of activities that are driving 80% of the results. And this is just a really important lesson to always remind ourselves of, that like, are we doing the thing that's actually driving results? Or are we doing what feels to us that like work and what looks like work to other people, but that's not actually driving the thing that we actually want to get out of it, especially if we're not having fun along the way. And one thing that I'm exploring a lot in the book that I'm working on is the idea that when we see work as having to be a hard thing, and we see work as having to be suffering, and we kind of imagine that things need to be harder than they actually are. And so we end up kind of spinning our wheels quite a lot, doing what we think looks like work. But if we stop and think about it and think, okay, what's actually important here? What are we working on? You know, just taking that time to take one step back is often really helpful. And I find that for me, whenever I actively take the time to do it, I think, there's probably an easier way to do this. There's probably something more important I could be focusing on rather than this thing that I'm spending a lot of time doing. So those were a bunch of life lessons from Elon Musk. If you enjoyed this video and thank you so much for watching. Do hit the subscribe button if you aren't already, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.